In the deep silence of space, a research vessel drifted between the dark lines of distant stars, its lights glowing faint against the endless night inside the vessel. A group of alien scholars worked tirelessly gathering samples from unknown planets and strange comets. They were explorers of knowledge, searching for things that could extend their understanding of the universe and perhaps give them an edge in survival. What they did not expect was that their most valuable discovery would not come from rocks or gases, but from a fragile creature. They had almost overlooked a human male taken from a forgotten colony world. The man's name was Daniel. He'd lived an ordinary life on a frontier settlement where people grew food, repaired machines, and dreamed of Earth, which was far away. He had never thought himself important. And when the aliens first took him, he believed they wanted to study human customs or test the endurance of his kind. He was confused but not terrified, because he had always been told that most intelligent species were more curious than cruel. Yet he soon learned that curiosity could become hunger when knowledge turned into desire. The aliens ran their tests, drawing blood, checking bones, and scanning every part of his body. At first, nothing unusual was found. Then, one of the scholars noticed a strange reading hidden deep within his biology. It was not an organ, not a disease, but a fluid produced under rare conditions. Its structure shimmered like liquid fire under their instruments. It seemed alive, carrying patterns that resonated with the aliens' own cells. When one of them touched a single drop to their skin, their body reacted instantly. Their strength returned, their vision sharpened, their fatigue disappeared. It was like drinking years of life in a heartbeat. They called it nectar. Though it was not sweet in taste, it carried a sweetness of survival, a promise of youth to those who consumed it. Within hours, the entire vessel whispered of the miracle. One human male could produce what entire civilizations had sought for centuries: immortality, or at least a piece of it. Daniel did not understand at first. The scholars spoke in languages he could not follow, their voices rising with excitement. Then guards began to watch him closely. Doors that once opened easily now stayed locked, and meals were brought to him by silent hands. He knew something had changed when one of the guards stared at him, not as a man but as a treasure, the way miners might stare at gold deep in a mountain. As days passed, Daniel began to feel a deep unease. His body was his own, yet now it belonged to others. He had been reduced to a resource, not a person. He tried to ask them why, but they gave no clear answer. One of the younger aliens simply whispered, "You are the key," and that was all he heard before silence fell again. Meanwhile, news spread beyond the vessel. Traders caught whispers, smugglers overheard encrypted messages. Words like human male nectar reached markets faster than light. Merchants argued in secret halls about the worth of this discovery. Some said it would be priceless. Others said no price could be set at all, because whoever controlled it would control power itself. Kings would bend, armies would bow, and the weak would pay everything to have even a taste. Daniel remained unaware of the growing storm. He only felt the weight of many eyes watching him when he slept. He dreamed of being hunted. When he woke, he found bruises on his arms from needles he did not remember. He began to fear that his body would not remain his for long, yet he still held a quiet hope that someone somewhere still saw him as a man on the vessel. The debate among the scholars grew. One side argued that Daniel should be preserved, treated well, allowed to live a peaceful life, so that the nectar could flow steadily for centuries. The other side insisted that his body could be harvested, quickly torn apart, for greater yield. Their voices clashed in meeting halls until one truth settled over them: no matter the method, Daniel would never again be free. The galaxy beyond was already moving faster than they knew. Pirate bands whispered of raids, governments sent spies, corporations prepared fleets, and all of them dreamed of holding in their hands what Daniel's blood and body contained. The scholars who first discovered him realized too late that their secret had become fuel for greed and war. Daniel sat in the quiet of his chamber, staring at the cold stars through a narrow window. He thought of his home of soil under his nails, of laughter around fires, of faces he would never see again. He wondered if they remembered him, or if he had already been erased from their Thoughts. He touched the glass and whispered to himself, I am not a treasure. I am a man. But his voice was swallowed by the hum of machines. That moment something shifted within him. He realized that if he wanted to survive, he could not wait for mercy. He would have to understand the value of what was inside him before others used it to destroy him. He would need to see himself not only as a man but as the center of a storm he had never asked for. And so the story of a simple human male, once lost in the silence of space, began to turn into something greater. He was no longer just Daniel. He was the keeper of a secret so powerful that empires would rise or fall because of it. And the galaxy had only just begun to learn his worth. The discovery of the human nectar did not remain hidden for long, because secrets in space travel faster than light, and greed travels even faster. Whispers of the substance reached smugglers who dealt in rare crystals. It reached traders who carried forbidden weapons. It reached rulers who would sacrifice whole fleets for a single advantage. Soon markets across distant systems buzzed with the same question: what is the price of the human male who carries immortality within his veins? Daniel, inside his sealed chamber, felt the change even before the guards told him anything. At first it was the way they looked at him, no longer as curious watchers, but as men who carried fear in their eyes, because they knew that beyond the walls, others were waiting to take him away. He noticed that meals became smaller, and the hours of light shorter. He felt the shift of the ship's engines, as if they were moving from system to system too quickly, as though fleeing a shadow. He did not yet understand then. One night, or what passed as night in space, the ship shook with sudden violence. Alarms screamed. The guards ran toward the halls. Daniel heard the sound of weapons discharging in the distance. His heart raced. He pressed his ear to the wall and caught pieces of shouted words: raiders, pirates, attackers. They had come for him, not for the vessel, not for cargo, not for knowledge. They had come for his body and what lived within it. The battle did not last long, because the research vessel was not built for war. The pirates forced their way in, but before they reached Daniel, the scholars triggered a jump into blind space. The ship was torn and scarred, but it escaped, leaving bodies behind floating in silence. Daniel did not see the fight, but he felt the terror. He understood then that he was not only a prisoner, but a prize being fought over by forces far beyond his control. From that moment his life became even more restricted. He was not allowed to walk freely, even within the narrow hallways. The guards treated him with a strange mix of caution and resentment. Some of them whispered that he was cursed. Others whispered that he was a gold mine that could save entire races. He listened in silence, and each word cut into him, because no one spoke of him as Daniel. No one remembered that he was a man with memories and hopes and a beating heart. He had become only the nectar. As the days stretched, he began to see how greed transformed the faces of those around him. The scholars, who once spoke kindly, now argued endlessly over how much to use and how much to store. The guards, who once offered food with steady hands, now trembled as if being near him made them dangerous targets. Even the machines seemed to hum louder, as if the ship itself knew it was carrying a treasure too heavy for its thin walls. Meanwhile, outside the vessel, the obsession grew powerful. Alien syndicates prepared fleets. They promised rewards to anyone who could bring back the human, alive or dead. Shadow markets filled with rumors of auctions where a single drop of nectar could purchase a moon. Criminals boasted that they would carve Daniel open and sell every part of him as relics of power. Even some governments considered capturing him, because no ruler wanted to see rivals grow stronger from his existence. And so, from the quiet of a single vessel, an entire galaxy began to tremble. Daniel, however, had no desire to be worshipped or sold. He felt fear growing inside him, like a second skin. He wondered what it meant to be human if the galaxy did not see him as one. He thought of his mother, who once told him that a man was not measured by what he carried in his body, but by the choices he made, and he repeated her words silently in the dark, because it was the only way to remember that he was more than nectar. One day a visitor arrived on the ship. She was not a scholar and not a soldier. She came cloaked in the colors of trade. She carried promises of safety. She said her People wished to protect Daniel, not harm him. They believed that, if he chose to share his nectar willingly, he could become the most respected being in the galaxy. Not a slave, but a leader at first. Daniel wanted to believe her. Her voice was calm. Her eyes did not burn with hunger. Like the others, she offered him freedom in exchange for trust. Yet in the quiet moments when she thought he was asleep, he heard her speaking through hidden devices. Her words betrayed her. She spoke not of protecting him, but of owning him. She described his body in measures and quantities like numbers on a merchant's list, and Daniel felt his hope turn to ashes in his chest. He realized that even kindness in this galaxy was another mask of greed. From then on, he stopped believing in promises. He studied every movement of the guards, every shift of the engines, every sound of the corridors. He began to see patterns, and with patterns came knowledge, and with knowledge came the first small seeds of resistance. For the first time since his capture, he no longer thought only of survival. He thought of fighting back. But the galaxy was not patient. Rival factions moved closer to the vessel, each promising death or fortune. The obsession with Daniel had grown into madness. Entire fleets were now shadowing the stars above him, each commander waiting for the right moment to strike, each mercenary dreaming of the riches his capture would bring. And Daniel sat alone in his narrow room, aware that all of them were willing to kill or pay anything to possess what only he could give, and the weight of that truth pressed upon him heavier than chains. The vessel drifted in the shadows of deep space, its hull scarred from the battles it had survived, the crew restless and divided by fear, while inside the small locked chamber, Daniel sat with his thoughts that had grown heavier each passing day. He no longer asked when he would be freed, because he had understood freedom was not in the minds of those who surrounded him. Freedom was a dream that had slipped away the moment they had tasted the nectar from his veins, and now he was no longer Daniel. He was a treasure chest to them, a resource that could never be allowed to vanish. The trader woman who had promised safety returned often. She spoke of plans of hidden worlds where Daniel could live in peace if only he trusted her. She painted pictures with her words of mountains of water and cities where no one would dare touch him. She said he would be honored and respected. But when Daniel listened closely, her voice trembled, not with care but with greed. She never once asked about his family or his past. She never asked what he wanted. She asked only about the nectar, how much it could be taken, how often it could be drawn, and how it could be shared among her people. Daniel wanted to trust, but trust had already been broken too many times. The guards who once treated him as fragile had become rough, pulling him when they wanted his blood. The scholars who once admired his resilience now spoke of him as if he were livestock. And even this woman who looked kind on the surface spoke of him as if he were a resource to be divided among merchants. He felt alone in a universe that did not recognize him as a menace. Days turned into weeks. Tension inside the ship grew fierce. Different groups of aliens argued in their own language. Daniel did not understand every word, but he understood the tones. They wanted to decide who would control him. Some said he should be delivered to powerful rulers for protection. Others said he should be kept hidden so that only they could benefit, but none said he should be free. And when Daniel realized this, he felt a deep cold settle in his chest, because it was proof that no matter where he turned, no one saw Daniel, they only saw Nectar. Then came the night when betrayal revealed itself fully. Daniel was awakened by the sound of footsteps, soft but hurried outside his chamber. The door hissed open, and the trader woman appeared, cloaked and carrying a small device. She told him to be silent. She told him that she was saving him. She said that the scholars could not be trusted, that the guards would eventually kill him, and that only she could bring him to safety. Her words were quick, her hands reaching for his arm. She begged him to follow. For a moment, Daniel almost believed her, because the promise of escape burned bright in his mind. But then he saw the device in her hand. It was not a key and not a weapon. It was a vial prepared to store what flowed in his blood. She was not here to save him. She was here to steal what he was before anyone else could. And in that moment, Daniel felt the heavy sting of betrayal. He pulled back his arm, and her mask of kindness cracked. Her eyes filled with anger as she whispered, "You are not a man, you are the future of my people, and I will not leave without youth." Struggle that followed was quick. The guards stormed and alarms rang through the vessel. Shouts filled the halls. Daniel was dragged back while the woman was seized. But even as they pulled her away, she screamed to the others that he belonged to her, and that the nectar should not be wasted. Daniel sat in silence after the chaos, his chest tight, his heart burning with the knowledge that even those who promised light carried darkness in their hands. After the betrayal, the scholars decided to move Daniel again. They no longer trusted traitors, they no longer trusted each other. The ship was to meet another vessel from a faction that had promised greater security. Daniel overheard enough to know that this was not safety. This was simply another cage painted in a different color. He would be passed like a relic from one group to another, his life reduced to a chain of transactions. The weight of this realization crushed him, but it also began to change him. He understood that waiting for others to save him was a path that led only to new prisons. He began to think of ways to use what he had not only as a weakness, but as a weapon. He remembered stories from his colony of hunters who set traps by using what predators wanted. Most they would let the hunger of the beasts blind them until it was too late, and Daniel began to see that perhaps the nectar could be more than a curse. Perhaps it could be a snare for those who sought it. But the galaxy outside was not waiting quietly. Rival factions were drawing closer. Fleets were clashing in the dark void, each side claiming that Daniel must belong to them. Wars that had nothing to do with him were being fought in his name, and entire systems prepared for battle, not for freedom, not for peace, but for the promise of a human male who carried immortality in his veins. Daniel sat in the quiet of his chamber, his hands clenched, his eyes staring into the cold light. He no longer whispered words of hope, he whispered words of resolve. If they would not see him as a man, then he would force them to see him as something greater, not as treasure, but as a power that could turn greed against itself. And thus betrayal did not end him, it shaped him. It gave him the fire to fight not only for himself, but for the truth that no human could ever be owned. And the galaxy, though it did not yet know, would soon learn that Daniel was not prey and not property. He was the storm rising from within the very chains they had placed upon him. Vessel drifted through dark space, carrying Daniel like a jewel hidden in iron. But unlike before, he no longer sat quietly waiting for fate to decide his future. The trail of the traitor had broken the last thread of hope he had in others, and now he looked inward, finding the strength that had been buried under fear. He realized that survival alone was no longer enough, because the galaxy had decided he was nothing more than nectar, and if he wished to remain a man, he would need to show them that humanity was not so easily broken. He began by studying everything around him. His eyes traced the patterns of the guards' footsteps. He counted the timing of the meals. He measured the pauses between engine shifts. He remembered the stories of hunters from his colony who would wait in silence, learning the rhythms of beasts until they knew the exact moment to strike. And he told himself that these guards were no different from predators drunk on the thought of treasure, blinded by greed. The scholars believed that Daniel was weak, that his value was only in his blood. But Daniel knew that knowledge itself could be a weapon, and patience could be sharper than any blade. So when the guards spoke, he listened. When the scholars argued, he listened, and slowly he pieced together fragments of information. He learned that rival fleets shadowed the ship like wolves, waiting for the moment to attack. He learned that even the crew feared each other because every faction wanted him for themselves, and trust had rotted away inside their hearts. At night, when silence filled the halls, Daniel sat with his thoughts. He remembered his mother's words that a man is more than what is taken from him. He remembered his father's voice telling him that the strongest trap is the one built from the greed of others, and he began to shape a plan in his mind. He would not run because there was no safe corner left in the galaxy. He would not beg because mercy had already abandoned him. Instead, he would become the storm that turned desire into destruction, the Chance came sooner than he expected because the vessel was forced out of its hidden path when a blockade formed ahead. Rival ships unleashed warnings, demanding that the human be handed over. The research vessel shook with fear, and in the chaos, Daniel saw opportunity. He convinced one of the younger guards to bring him water, and when the guard hesitated, Daniel spoke softly, reminding him that if Daniel died, the nectar would be lost forever. The guard, nervous and greedy, obeyed, not realizing that by opening the door, even for a short moment, he had given Daniel the first step toward freedom. Daniel did not fight with fists, because fists would not win against walls of metal and guns of plasma. Instead, he fought with words and with knowledge. He whispered to the guards that the scholars planned to sell him to another faction. He whispered to the scholars that the guards had plotted to steal him for themselves. And like poison, his words spread, turning suspicion into fear, turning fear into anger. The crew began to fracture even faster than before, because greed had already hollowed their unity. As the vessel tried to escape the blockade, Daniel used the chaos to demand a voice. He told them that he would only give nectar if he was allowed to speak to the rival fleet, and desperate for survival, they agreed. He stood before the communication device, his heart steady, his voice carrying more power than he knew. He told the rival fleet that his nectar was limited, that it carried dangers when taken without care, that those who consumed it without his guidance would suffer madness and pain. He painted a picture of risk so sharp that doubt began to spread among those who listened. Scholars raged behind him, calling him a liar. The guards threatened him, but Daniel did not stop. He understood that fear was as strong a weapon as hunger, and if he could twist their obsession into fear, he could shift the balance for the first time. Since his capture, he was not a silent prisoner. He was the one shaping the thoughts of those who sought to own him. Blockade erupted into conflict. Rival ships turned on each other, each believing that the others had already taken too much nectar. Panic spread like wildfire. The research vessel slipped through the chaos, while behind it fleets destroyed themselves in blind greed. Daniel watched the distant flashes of battle through the window and felt no pity, because he knew they had brought this on themselves. Yet even in victory, Daniel did not relax. He knew that as long as the galaxy believed the nectar existed, he would never be safe. He would never be seen as Daniel, only as the resource that had to be possessed. But for the first time, he felt the fire of resistance burning strong. He had used their greed as a weapon, and it had worked. Now he understood that his survival depended not on hiding, but on controlling the story others told about him. When the vessel reached a quiet system to repair, Daniel sat in his chamber, no longer in despair, but in determination. He was beginning to turn from prey into hunter, his mind sharper than chains, his spirit stronger than cages. He whispered to himself that humanity was not weak. Humanity was not prey. And if the galaxy wanted to test the will of man, it would soon learn that one human could set fire to the stars. Crew outside argued among themselves, broken by distrust. The scholars accused the guards accused the scholars, and in their noise, none of them noticed that Daniel was no longer the frightened captive they had taken from his colony. He was becoming something else, something the galaxy had never prepared for a man who carried not just nectar, but the will to fight back with every breath. And as the stars turned slowly around him, Daniel prepared for the final step, because he knew that resistance alone would not end the storm. To truly be free, he would need to end the obsession once and for all. And in the silence of that moment, he began to see the path forward, a path that would force the galaxy to look at him, not as nectar, not as treasure, but as human. The quiet system where the vessel hid gave Daniel his first true chance to think without the thunder of constant alarms and battles. He sat by the narrow window, staring at the slow-turning stars, and he understood that the storm was not ending on its own. Even now the galaxy whispered his name in secret markets. Even now, rulers and criminals planned how they would capture him and bleed him dry. Even now the nectar was more important to them than peace or life, and he knew that if he wished to live as a man, he could not wait for mercy. He would have to decide the ending with his own hands. The crew believed they had him under control, but what they did not see was how carefully he'd been shaping their fear. His words had already broken their unity. Suspicion had already taken root, and now he understood that he needed one last strike, something so sharp that the entire galaxy would step back, not out of respect, but out of dread. So he began to plan in silence, using everything he had learned since the moment of his capture. He whispered again to the guards. In moments when they were alone, he told one that the scholars had already created secret vials, and that he was no longer needed. He told another that rival factions knew the ship's location, and that they had been betrayed, and he watched as their faces tightened with doubt. He did the same with the scholars, reminding them that the guards were growing greedy, that soon they would take him away and sell him on their own, and in this way he twisted them further apart until trust vanished completely. And the ship became a prison of voices snapping at each other. Daniel's true strike was not against the crew, it was against the galaxy itself. He asked for access to the communication system again, and desperate to keep the peace, the fractured crew allowed it, believing that they could control him. But Daniel had no intention of begging this time. Instead, he spoke with calm and strength across the channels that reached not only fleets but hidden traitors and spies. He told them that the nectar was a curse. He told them that it burned those who consumed it. He told them that entire bodies could collapse if too much was taken. And he added that the only way to survive its touch was through his own will, that without him guiding it. The nectar was poison. The word spread faster than fire, because every captain and every ruler feared the same thing. They feared death. They feared weakness, and suddenly, what had been treasure became danger, and though some still doubted, the seeds of fear grew deep. Daniel had used the one weapon the galaxy could not resist, the fear of losing everything. Days passed. Rival fleets began to retreat. None wanted to be the first to test the risk. None wanted to show weakness by falling into madness. From a drop of nectar, and slowly the shadow that had been hunting Daniel began to fade. The obsession cooled, not into peace, but into hesitation, and hesitation was the shield Daniel needed inside the vessel. The crew finally broke apart. The guards fought with the scholars. Weapons flared in the narrow halls. The traitor woman's allies tried to seize him once more, but in the chaos, Daniel did not run. He stood firm because he knew the battle was not truly about guns or cages. It was about control of the story, and now he controlled it. When the smoke cleared, the vessel was in ruins, pieces drifting in the void. But Daniel was alive, and those who survived looked at him, no longer with hunger, but with fear, because they believed his words, and they feared the curse. Daniel used the broken ship to send one last message across the stars. He told the galaxy that humanity could not be owned, that those who tried would find only ruin. He said that the nectar was not a gift, but a reminder that humans carried within them something no other species could claim, not just blood and bone, but the will to rise above chains. And in those words, he declared his freedom not only for himself, but for his kind, and the message echoed into countless systems until even those who had never seen a human began to whisper with caution. When silence finally returned, Daniel stood alone among the wreckage. He looked at the stars and felt the weight of everything that had passed. He had been hunted like an animal. He had been betrayed and reduced to a resource. But in the end, he had turned their greed against them. He had made the nectar into a weapon that no one dared to touch, and in doing so, he had reclaimed his identity, not as treasure, but as human. He thought of his colony far away, of the soil he had once walked, and the voices of people who might still remember his name. He did not know if he would ever return, but he knew that the galaxy would never again see a human as simple prey. For he had forced them to understand that behind the fragile body of man was a strength they could never control. Stars stretched endless before him, and Daniel felt no fear because he carried within him not only the nectar, but the proof that one human could bend the will of empires. He had become the storm, and the storm had passed, leaving behind a warning that no alien would forget. And so the story ended, not with Daniel in chains, not with him lost as a resource, but with him standing Free under the vast silence of space, the keeper of a secret that had nearly consumed him, and the symbol of a truth that the galaxy would never again ignore. Humanity could not be bought, humanity could not be owned, humanity would always fight back. The end.